year in financial services and law. And then at university, my first summer, I did a bit of work experience for an investment management firm, and then I worked for Camp America. And then that summer, that autumn, I applied for Spring Weeks, and I did one at Goldman Sachs in their research division, and also one at Lazard for 3 days in their global advisory team. The next spring, I did some more work experience for a different capital management firm, and then I had an internship with Evercore during my year abroad, where I also worked in Chile. And then that autumn, I applied for graduate positions and got my current job, which was 6 months or 4 months delayed, but I'm finally there. In terms of figuring out what suited me best, it took some time, and even, to be honest, until my graduate applications, I was still really torn. Didn't know whether I wanted to be in research, in terms of investment research, so advising clients on which stocks to buy and sell, and which industries have good prospects, etc., or consulting or global advisory. What made me land in investment banking was through the different work experience I'd done. I had narrowed down which options I didn't enjoy, or which divisions I hadn't what didn't interest me as much. And I really liked investment banking because it's a real client-focused aspect of finance, where it's all about advising a client and helping them through financial issues that their firm might face towards the future across the whole world. It's really global, and as a languages student, that really appealed to me. But it's also a huge combination of both communication and analytical skills. So it really helps you do the numbers side, and also do the more people-focused aspect side. And it's also quite creative, which is really fun.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds like you've had so much experience, which is great. Tyrone?
Yeah, so I mean, likewise, I had a very similar problem, just deciding between and just going through all the different industries, really. And for me, the only way to go about it was you just have to try out everything. So, starting from sixth form, my sister works in audit for PwC. And so I started having a look at, just going through accounting firms, going through a couple of their insight programs. And then that just transitioned over to Spring Weeks for investment banking and BlackRock as well. So asset management, I touched upon in first year. But from then, I kind of decided that asset management wasn't really for me, because on the research type of things, you're just the sole analyst for their sector. So in a way, it's sort of teamwork, because you are working together, like say in the Europeans team, but you are still working alone. And I didn't really like that as much. Whereas when you're in investment banking, for example, in a FIG team, everyone's working on the same projects together. You're chatting to every single member of your team, and that's what I liked about it, really. And yeah, so I tried out a number of things, really. So I did Spring Weeks at Lazard, Evercore, and BlackRock, and I just landed at Lazard. Beggars can't be choosers, really, with your firms. So that's how you end up choosing your firm, anyway. But yeah, that's generally why I ended up in investment banking. I had to look at things like sales and trading as well. I had to look at consulting, but generally, exactly what Sabrina said, really, it was the right balance of everything, in terms of client facing, in terms of the work environment, and how it's is very social in aspect, especially a firm like Lazard or Rothschild.
Great. So you guys kind of detailed that you'd had a lot of experience at different firms, and you kind of touched upon the fact that you kind of obviously landed Lazard, but they're both kind of independent firms. And could you maybe detail what it is about working at an independent firm that really appealed to you over, say, a bulge bracket, that other people might not understand the difference between the two?
Yeah, I don't mind taking that one to start with. So just to explain, because a lot of people don't understand, even people going for graduate positions don't understand the difference. So in terms of the financial banks, as it were, and investment firms, they differentiate between the bulge bracket. So these are huge multinational firms that will offer every service to a client. They'll have an asset management division, they'll have a wealth management division, they'll have an investment banking division, sales and trading, everything there can have upwards of, and as well as a commercial arm, so credit cards and the like, or mortgages. So someone like JP Morgan is one of those firms. They have 300,000 employees around the world. You then have smaller firms, which are more like Goldman Sachs, who are more specialized in the investment side of things. And then independents like Evercore and Lazard, and or the boutique and Rothschild. For me, I've always preferred the smaller team aspect. I went to boarding school for 10 years, and then I went to a collegiate university. It's more of a natural progression for me. I liked working with smaller deal teams, especially investment banking. That's a real value driver of joining a smaller firm. You know you're going to have client interactions from your first day on the job. Additionally, I just found in my experience, I always enjoy the cultures more, meeting people at smaller firms, and I felt that you're more valued as an employee rather than just like a cog in the wheel.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Anything to add, Tyrone?
Yeah, no, I just want to say, yeah, I can definitely vouch for that. Because, you know, a lot of firms will be like, you know, you have like all this access to seniors, and I mean, maybe it's true, but I haven't really had much board bracket experience. But I can tell from, you know, from my time on the summer internship at Lazard that it was definitely the case. Like, if I could just ping a message to the MD, and then later in the week we could have a call for like half an hour or an hour, and then he'd be more than happy to have his time taken, and likewise with just any member of the team. And I think it's that aspect which I really appreciated. You know, you can get help off anyone, and it's immediate, and you know, it's a lot more. Yeah, it's a lot more social environment, and that's definitely what I enjoyed. You know, it's not even just work chat. You know, you can just have. It's very easy to just have normal chats with anyone in your team, and because the analyst class is so small, everyone's very tight knit, which is definitely a really good factor in it.
I'll just say that it's not to say that like working for a bigger firm or bulge bracket isn't like worthwhile. It just depends on personal preference. If you really like being in like a thriving organization that has lots of different divisions where you can gain a lot of different experiences, then maybe a bulge bracket or a larger financial institution might be for you. But it's purely down to personal preference. And if you enjoy like a smaller team, or you like having lots of people around you and lots of opportunities, it's purely up to you.
Yeah, that's definitely such a good point. I think making sure that you get spring week kind of experience at lots of different firms, so you can try out different firms and find what environment is going to work best for you, is definitely better, I think. So maybe we could move on to the application process, and if you could maybe detail what you found the most difficult about it and how you kind of overcame those challenges.
I'd say going in, when I started applying for like financial like work experience programs, it was like years ago. I was trying to think about like 4 years ago. And back then there weren't as many opportunities. So now there's a lot of spring weeks. Like I was researching with a mentee recently, it's like 30, 40. When I applied, there was like 10. So initially with me, when applying, it was more lack of knowledge about what I was doing or what I was applying to. The world of like careers and developments really progressed, especially for undergraduates and for sixth form leavers as well. And there's a huge opportunity range. For me, it was like the first time you do your CV, the first time you do a cover letter, the first time you do a video interview, a telephone interview, you go to an assessment center, they're all really, really challenging. For me particularly, key thing that I had to really improve upon was coming from a humanities background, going into the financial world. I really had to prove that I had technical skills, and I had maths A level, which really helps, but it wasn't enough, and some work experience. And then I did a small finance exam in my year abroad that seemed to help, but it can be really challenging.
Yeah, definitely. For me, I'd say the hardest bit was the group tasks in the assessment centers, because I feel like that's the only thing that's, you know, semi out of your control. And you know, if you can in some way, there's a lot of help available. So whether you're like a spring week applicant, summer, or even grad, even you know, it could be organizations like SEO London or Reach. I know they run some mock assessment centers, and yeah, so it's quite tough if it's your first assessment you've ever done. But generally, you know, they always follow like a typical structure, so it's not too bad with some research and help and some practice with them. And especially in the group task, you know, I'd add that you have to be quite self-aware. So you're making sure you're contributing, but not too dominating. You know, being inclusive in discussions, and just checking that whatever you say is being meaningful rather than like waffle or whatever. And you know, of course, interviews can be really tough as well. But I'd always just make sure to just clarify, you know, every step with HR, you know, what to expect from it. Because it might be a technical interview, and you waste all your time just preparing like competencies, for example. So I'd say that's always something to make sure you do.
So we've just actually had a question. Someone has asked, can you talk about the group assessment tips a little bit more? Is there anything that you'd want to kind of maybe add, I guess, specifically about group assessments?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So the one big thing was always about like delegating stuff at the start. So it's because it's very tight timing. So I think sometimes like half an hour and there's about 6 of you, so you all have to discuss things. So you really even got like 5 minutes each. So you can always, even at the very start, at least try and split up the timing. So be like, okay, we have 10 minutes, we can go around discussing each of like what packs of information that we have, and then we can have 10 minutes, debating and filtering out options, and then 10 minutes for a conclusion that we can present at the end. So it's doing stuff like that, just making sure everything's organized just right from the get-go. And there's always that, and timekeeping as well. So making sure that someone actually is aware of like, okay, 10 minutes is up, now we have to move on, or pushing people along if they're like waffling a little bit is always good.
Yeah.
I would also add that I've done quite a few group assessments, and also some companies don't do group assessments. So Rothschild, for instance, I did one, I had to present a deal instead. But I remember at previous assessment days, be that person that asks people who aren't speaking their opinion, because that's really valued in teams in general, because it's part of teamwork and communication skills. But you don't want to be overpowering in a conversation, but also make sure that everyone has their voice heard, and that they will always pick on that.
Yeah, no, definitely agree with that. I was actually going to ask, so I know you mentioned, Sabrina, that you came from a non-finance background. How did you go about increasing your technical awareness and also commercial awareness as well? Like, what resources did you use?
Yeah, so the frustrating thing sometimes is that you'll apply for some programs and they'll say like, you don't need this skill, or this isn't valued, and then the reason why you don't go further is because you don't have that skill. And so it can be really frustrating. For me, in terms of increasing my technicals, just researching online and trying to teach yourself them can really help. But if you want to prove a bit more concrete impact, go about like courses. There's lots of courses online, especially during like the virtual world that it is now. I did like a small finance exam called the investment management certificate that I took on my own, but also there's lots of opportunities through universities. If you can prove that you have like improved upon skills, that's really valued, that you're improving upon weaknesses. In terms of commercial awareness, there's lots of opportunities now and lots of different platforms you can utilize. For me, the most useful ones were like the obvious ones, like the BBC, FT, Economist, but also now podcasts are really useful. And additionally, the Bright Network does commercial awareness emails, as does Investopedia, and Finimize I really enjoy as well, which is like a daily email that kind of briefly explores like big stories in the markets. But commercial awareness is essential nowadays. Nearly every interview you have, you'll get a question on it about like a recent news article that's interesting, and also try and look beyond the headlines and think how it might impact a firm.
Yeah, definitely. Anything that you'd like to add, Tyrone, to that?
Yeah, I can say Finimize was so good as well, because the way they lay out their emails is like they split it up into different sections. So they'll give you like the little headline, and they'll explain it briefly, and they'll explain what is the impact, and they'll go further in, and that teaches you a really important skill. So instead of just reading an article, it's good to start developing an opinion on whatever the event is, because when you're going into interviews and the interviewer is always asking the same question, they'll probably get the same response from like half the people or like a quarter of the people. So if you're able to just add that little bit extra on like what you think that means, and going beyond the article, I think that makes that just a little bit of a difference. And Finimize does teach that in a way, for the way they set out the email.
Definitely. I think it's sometimes quite easy to be overwhelmed with, like, I remember when I first started with applications, I subscribed to absolutely everything I could, and then I would just get bombarded with emails. So I think finding something that you really like Finimize is such a good way of going about it. So I guess moving on to CV and cover letter advice, what are your top tips for CV and cover letter applications?
God, there are a lot. For me, if it's your first time doing a CV or cover letter, try and ask any careers advice teams you can get hold of, whether it's a school, whether it's university. Make sure they're both very well structured. Make sure you're not copy and pasting. Make sure you tailor them to each specific firm, because you'll get caught out if you accidentally paste Morgan Stanley when you're actually applying to Goldman Sachs, for instance. I've heard of that happening. In terms of cover letter, try and do as much research as you can before you write them. And be really clear in why you're applying to the industry, why you're applying to the firm, why your skills are suitable for the role, and anything that really stands out to you about the firms. I always really enjoyed writing about diversity initiatives or community investment programs, and that really seems to make my application stand out.
Yeah, I mean, I can say I definitely made that mistake. So I left Rothschild on like one of my Morgan Stanley letters, and when I found out, I immediately withdrew it. But I've heard that people like still getting interviews even if that happening, with that happening. But yeah, 100% just make sure you just triple check it. If you've got like a standard template cover letter, you can always like Control F the firm. So if you're reusing your Rothschild letter, you can control F Rothschild to see if it's still there when you finish it by the end. It's just always a good double check. I mean, in terms of CVs, so I've reviewed quite, loads of CVs for friends, and it's really important to just catch, the grammatical errors, formatting inconsistencies, something along those lines, which you should just be nailing really, because you just want your final CV to be like A1, especially when the job is just so focused on attention to detail. So it could be as small as making sure you're consistent with the use of bullet points, italics, bolding, spacing, just the minor stuff like that. And you can always get it checked by your uni's career service. I know the one at Cambridge is pretty useful in terms of just giving you templates and things like that. But also, again, like the organizations like SEO London or Reach, Rare, they always have all these CV checks before you submit your application.
Yeah, definitely. That's such good advice. So I guess moving on now to interviews, what was the most difficult interview question that you faced?
I faced a shocker when I was at university once. Bear in mind, when you're a university student, you don't have much experience unless you've done a lot of like work experience or internships, because as a four-year graduate, I could only apply in my second and third years. I once had, when did you face an ethical issue and how did you overcome it? And I won't lie, I did lie. But I think the important thing is you have to be able to, they don't really, the interviewer and the HR person, whoever's interviewing, doesn't really care so much about the details. It's more about how you present an answer and how you communicate it and how you structure your answer. If that's done all really well and really convincingly, and it sounds true, even if it's not, whatever it might be, then they'll be happy with the answer. But it's all about how you communicate. It's not about what you're actually talking about, unless they're asking specific skills. But I think always have a go and try not to and ah. Try and fill the space if you're not too sure, and say it's a really interesting question. What I would say in reply to that would be just to try and give yourself some time.
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually quite curious. What did you end up saying?
I ended up talking about one of my lecturers asked us to write about a topic that may be really uncomfortable from like a female point of view, and I wasn't very keen on writing my coursework on it, and brought it up to like the department head, and they seemed to believe that.
That's good, the fact that you thought of that on the spot as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, Tyrone, anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, so one of my Spring Week interviews, the banker just dropped in like halfway through. He was like, well, tell me your funniest joke. And obviously I was just caught off guard by that. So I just choked, and I don't know I couldn't come up with like a work appropriate joke that would be funny at the same time. So I mean, I don't even know what I said, but I just know I didn't get the offer in the end. But I mean, aside from that, brain teasers are usually pretty hard, especially if you don't prepare for them.
Always.
Yeah, so like I usually just winged mine, because you're not expecting it usually, and if it's like an IBD interview, but say it's a sales and trading, there's so many there's courses and things like that, and there's like pages and pages of brain teasers to go through. But it's
mental maths.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it could be very something simple like, what's the angle between the hands at 3:30 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
But like, if you don't just take your time to think about it, you can just say very stupid answers, which I did half the time.
Yeah, I would say definitely maybe Google a few brain teasers, because I think interviewers sometimes just Google them and then they'll use one of like the top ones that come up, because I had one of those like Rubik's Cube ones where it's like work out how many cubes there are on the face of the Rubik's Cube or something. And it was one of those ones that's quite obvious, and it does come up a lot if you just Google it. So maybe do your research with those. But what would you say you did to prepare for interviews, in terms of, did you use technical guides, or like how did you practice before going in?
For me, it's all about your research. For instance, when I used to, once I'd had like quite a few, because I think over the years I think I had like 30 or 40 interviews. It's quite stacked up considerably. First, reach out to anybody who works at the firm, or any contacts you can find through your through friends or family, or through societies, on LinkedIn. People are really like happy to answer questions, and get like a first-hand experience, and then research the firm, go trawl like everything through their careers website, the firm in the recent news, and then like work on your competency and like technical answers to questions. And that's just pretty like research online, and also practice. I used to talk to myself in the mirror. It looks a bit stupid, but it really helps.
Yeah, no, I did the exact same. You just have to I always just literally listed out every single competency question that just could be asked on a Word document, and just had a couple bullets at least for what I would say, or maybe two examples per if it was a very common one, and then just using your friends as well, because it's very likely that both of you, or a couple of people who are also going to be applying for all these spring weeks or summers or grads, and just being able to have someone to bounce off all your answers and seeing. Because I was quite harsh with my friends and being like, because I got taught this from rare recruitment, and it's kind of like, you're telling a story of your competency questions, and if you are getting bored, then you just know your answer isn't the best, because you always want to be, you kind of want to be like clickbaiting your interviewer, just making sure they're reeled in just straight away from the first sentence, and if that's not the case, then you kind of already lost them, because most of the times with the fit interviews, there's always just, can you get on the interviewer, and if you can't catch their attention or whatever, then it's gonna be hard working all those long nights with them.
Yeah, I'll point out that some interviews I've had, you can hear them, especially if it's a telephone one, like going through a list and like tick boxing, and even in like, assessment centers, Morgan Stanley, they tick boxes in front of you, which can be disconcerting. But then like Lazard, the interviews I had there, that I can ask you anything. It's more like, tell me about your family. So they can be really like out there. Just don't panic, and if you don't know the answer, be honest.
Yeah, that's definitely right. What would you actually say for the final question at the end? Because that's always kind of tricky and it can catch people out. So what's your advice about that?
In terms of when they say, do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Always have one. Make sure you have at least like 1, 2, 3. For me, I always like looked in the news, and if the company had a recent acquisition, or they had like a new like diversity initiative, I normally asked about that, or ask the people who are interviewing you, like, tell me a bit about like how did you get here on your career path, or what's been the most interesting day on the job. Try not to be so like stereotypical and answering like explain like a day-to-day in your life. Kind of thing, but think of insightful questions, because it makes it more fun for the interviewer as well, and they'll remember you.
Yeah, I definitely say I back the what's the most interesting day, or like what I usually ask was like, what's the most interesting project you've done, because a lot of people can come up with like really boring questions, so making sure you just have like definitely just have a list of ready. You can have a list of like set questions, but what's quite good as well is, usually they'll just introduce themselves at the very start. So if you can just think about that and keep it in mind for the end, and you can somehow like rip that. So if they say they work in the consumer retail team, maybe chat about that, or like, oh, what's that like? How are you finding it? Something like that.
Remember their name. That's always really helpful. If you're in an interview in person, I'd always recommend asking for like a pad and paper and write down the details they tell you at the beginning, because they always will. But also for me, what worked, I think, with some interviews is asking them something about the firm that they don't know the firm do, or they don't know the firm is like announced, and then suddenly they're caught off guard, and it's quite fun.
I've not heard that one before. That's quite interesting, but yeah, I might have to try it. So I guess now moving on to like internships, maybe if you guys could detail your internship experience in a bit more detail, and what kind of you found good about it, maybe what you found quite difficult. So Sabrina, if you go first.
So I interned with Evercore last summer in their oil and gas advisory team. It's 10 weeks, as internships used to be until this year. And the first week was all training. It's a bit of technical, a bit social skills, a bit about the firm. And then I was put with my team. There was no rotation, which I would have preferred, but I took the opportunity that I had. It was independent, so I was glad for that experience. Work was really interesting. I had a lot of different mandates or projects, huge variety there, and my team was quite small, which was quite nice. A few difficult things. There weren't that many late nights, surprisingly. I think the latest I worked was 11:30, which is quite rare. And there was a bit of like a laddish culture, which was a bit interesting for me. I'm fine with it because I have brothers, but I think it could put some people off. But I think that's purely on a team by team basis. But if you try and get on with everyone and like make an effort to go out on like Fridays and just go with them to like company drinks or events and get to know people and really try and make yourself indispensable, that's what will get you rehired. I think the hardest thing for me, like a couple of days I had like multiple competing deadlines, and that can be really stressful. But as long as you ask the people who give you the work their expectations when they want the work and make a plan, it's pretty manageable. And the internships can be really fun. Well, they should be really fun.
Yeah, just before I go into my internship, I just wanted to say, like, I think your team choices like matter so much. And so, you know, like some teams do have a laddish culture, for example. And, you know, if you don't think you'll enjoy that, then obviously, like, if you can, like, make sure you get your preferences ahead. And you know, the one way you can do that is, say, you know, you could have someone from the uni, and, you know, who's an analyst at the bank you're going to. And if you just, you know, drop them a message, you can have a little couple conversations, couple calls, and they'll probably just go through like what teams would like, you know, they'll tell you what the culture is essentially. So I had that, and, you know, it helped me a lot in terms of like deciding what team preferences I wanted to put down. But yeah, so for my internship, so it was all online. Mine was quite rare, so I was actually still 10 weeks. So we had 2 weeks training, which I think they extended that just, you know, for practical reasons. And that was really good. So they personally, like, I didn't really prep too much for my internship, which was a bit dangerous. But it's because, like, I think, so I actually missed the first day of my internship because one of my exams just finished on that day. So like it was a very tight deadline in terms of like everything going on. But yeah, generally, like, training does cover a lot of things. But I'd say the one thing which, you know, you should always do is like make sure you're quite close with a couple of the interns. So if you do have any, like, you know, very basic questions, you can always just, I mean, I'm sure the trainer will always answer them as well, but, you know, there's always people who on your internship as well who can just like lend you a hand. So I had this European guy, and he helped me with everything, literally from like week 0 to like to the end of my project. He was just helping me answer all these accounting questions. But yeah, so after that, I got placed with the FIG team, worked with them for 6 weeks. Likewise, you know, I didn't really have too many late nights. It wasn't too bad. I think generally as well, because it was online, so they can't really, like, I mean, I guess like the trusting bit is a bit difficult because they don't really know what you're doing. So yeah, so I think generally that played into it. But I know some of the teams were really they were quite intense for the 6 weeks. And then after that, we had 2 weeks to do a project. So we had to make a full-on pitch book. You had to come up with a transaction idea. Yeah, it was intense. And then you had to do like all the modeling and stuff like that as well. So that was really hard. Honestly, like, I think those were my latest nights. It wasn't actually like the teamwork. So because you just had to pick it up all on the spot. So I mean, yeah, if you are doing a summer, like, definitely do prep in case that does happen. Because then I had to learn everything like on the spot and also do it at the same time. So that was quite rough.
Yeah, that does sound quite rough.
Yeah.
So I know you guys touched on like the difference between the teams and the cultures, but maybe if you could just explain what the difference between a sector and a product team is, and what the work that they would do, and how that differs, just for people that might not know. And like,
Yeah, so
and industrials, for example.
So from like my experiences in like smaller firms, you have normally what they call sector teams, and then product teams or service teams. So within investment banking, you have like the traditional M&A, so mergers and acquisitions, which will split into a lot of times sector teams. So it can be any, like an industry teams. You might have automotives, oil and gas, consumer, retail, leisure, technology, media, telecoms, FIG, like Tyrone. And then you might have teams that are in charge of raising money, or raising capital for a firm through equity markets or through debt markets, so ECM and DCM, and then like a restructuring team as well, so aiding companies when they are facing liquidation or insolvency. And that you also have to choose whether you want to go product or services, because normally most firms you don't rotate across those.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much comprehensive. I can't think of anything to add. But what, in terms of, I know you mentioned it was the culture that you guys particularly liked about your teams. Was it also the work maybe that made it stand out? For example, why industrials over any other like sector team, or why FIG for you, Tyrone?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I chose FIG. So it was like, it's a mix of just something, well, it's completely different. So a lot of the modeling and a lot of the terms are all completely different because, you know, the way banks are, they're structured, they're very heavily regulated. So when you're just going into all those financial statements, it's all just something completely new. So I thought, you know, it kind of pushed myself a little bit. Probably don't recommend for the summer because you have to learn, you have to pick up all these things on the spot. But yeah, I mean, generally it was fun. And so at Al-Azhar, you know, half the work is with like fintech companies. So that's the cool bit. It wasn't just traditional banks and insurance companies. So like the VP on the team, he's in charge of like a lot of fintech clients. So I got a lot of exposure to that. It was cool just learning all about all these payments companies and things like that, and how they're regulated and how their regulation differs. So yeah, knowing that, like I really wanted to go into FIG just to try it out really. And I think what made that happen was the fact that the analyst program is rotational. So I knew that if I wasn't the biggest fan of FIG, I could always rotate out for the analyst program.
Yeah, my difference is my internship at Evercore, we didn't rotate and we didn't get a choice for an internship. I know they rotate for their graduate program, but at Rothschild we don't rotate at all. So put straight into a team. So in a sense we did speed dating in December instead. So it was a very weird experience. We had the tables turned, so they were looking for us to hire them essentially. And we chatted to each team or representatives of each team for like a couple of like round robins. So every team for 15 minutes and then rotate round. I put 5 forward, and then obviously the teams put theirs forward and we got matched up. We're really excited for Mining Metals. It's really current affairs driven. It's probably of all sector teams like one of the most affected by geopolitical events, purely in terms of if there's civil unrest, there's obviously going to be problems with the mines, or if there's like political and economic volatility. It makes it really interesting, but also it's hugely global. And I think it's a really interesting sector because precious metals, for instance, are and will become essential for technology in the future. So it's really linked to tech as well, which I think is something that interests both Tyrone and myself, and it will be one of the biggest trends for everyone's futures.
Yeah, definitely. That's so true. I was actually going to ask that a bit later on, but since we're on the topic now, what kind of future trends do you see affecting the landscape of your role? And maybe how has COVID affected your teams in particular?
Tyrone, do you want to take it first?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so I mean that's a pretty big question, I guess. So I know, so I'm quite interested in hopefully going into the restructuring team for my analyst program. So obviously, COVID has just massively impacted that, and there's so many mandates that Lazar's just having to land in terms of all that. So a lot of companies are having to go into all this debt. They're missing all the debt obligations. So someone like Lazard or any independent advisor could go in, deal with all the stakeholders, somehow figure out a workaround, and eventually put forward like a business plan that hopefully recovers the business. Aside from that, I know for the FIG team, COVID especially, there's a lot of buyers in that. There's a lot of interest from private equity and a lot of like financial interest as well. So incumbent businesses potentially looking at payments companies or things like that. The environment obviously generates a lot of uncertainty, but I think with it clearing up, the presidential elections, with the vaccine news coming out, that's all clearing up, and you're actually seeing a lot of mergers coming through now. So that's definitely something to keep track of.
Yeah, I would totally agree. Like this year, from what I've been reading, it's the highest year for like merger and acquisition fees, like the highest investment banking fees, like billions being spent. There's no worry of business, and like we've seen, like the financial markets have never been higher. In terms of my team, we also do a lot of restructuring, which is quite odd because we don't give our restructuring within our sector to any other teams. We do our own house because it's very different. But it's again technology, not just in terms of manufacturing and processing, but in terms of exploration and prospecting and processing the whole way down the manufacturing line. So like AI, Internet of Things, cloud computing, all of that is seriously important and will only grow. Also, interesting trend will be China's dominance on the manufacturing market for precious metals and the like, and commodities, since they have a real stronghold and stranglehold in some areas. So there's lots of different trends, and they're very hard to keep track of. But it always always gives opportunities for bankers like ourselves.
Definitely.
That's really cool, actually. All the stuff that you're covering.
Sounds like you get quite a nice range.
Yeah, you also have to, for a lot of our mandates, you have to do a lot of, negotiations with governments. So if they're having issues, like in Africa, for instance, a lot of civil unrest going on in countries that have really big mines. That makes it very worrying. And COVID has really affected certain aspects. So due diligence, when you're essentially doing a deal and you want to make sure that the client has the assets they say they have before you sell them. You'd normally go out to the mine and see that. Obviously right now we can't, so things like drones are being really relied on, and like virtually being able to see stuff. So it's really interesting time for change.
Oh, that sounds really so interesting. But in terms of, like, you touched on technology affecting the roles as well. Do you see, say, maybe having coding skills becoming more important, or what other skills do you think are important for students to work on now and for the future?
From what I've been told by like HR and stuff, coding is now really like seen as a big driver in terms of when I've asked people like what should like undergrads or school leavers like focus on to go into what are the big areas, they always say coding, green finance, like ESG, environmental social governance issues, as like climate change becomes really important, but also especially coding. I'd really recommend anyone to get just even a basic experience, because it really helps and it sets you apart, because all the like financial markets now run through electronic like systems, and coding is like the language of finance, so it's helpful for sure. I don't have any or many skills in that, but I have other skills that are more important.
Yeah, one thing I would actually recommend is Code First Girls. If you're obviously a girl, they do free courses on Python and web development, so they're quite good. Definitely recommend those. Anything that you'd like to add, Tyrone?
Yeah, I mean, so likewise, I don't really have many coding skills whatsoever. I tried dabbling in it, but then I don't know, my interest just got lost very quickly. But I know in a lot of like, so I know BlackRock said it was very important for them. And likewise, for sales and trading, it'll be very important there as well, because they're pushing that very heavily. Whereas I know for the obviously like the M&A side, there hasn't been too much on it. I think that's largely because obviously it's just so relationship driven in that sense. But yeah, there's always room to automate things. So, I mean, maybe in like 5 years down the line or even closer, coding skills probably will become more important and might actually be part of training.
Yeah, definitely. So we did touch a bit on COVID, but I'm kind of curious to know what your tips are for standing out online. I know you did your internship virtually, Tyrone, so maybe if you could detail what you did to make sure that you converted it, even though it was obviously not in person.
Yeah, I mean, I actually feel like the biggest differences really for like a summer internship is like one in office and one online was because we were all working remotely. You couldn't really just go to your buddy's desk and just ask for help, and that's something which can be really hard at the start. But that's where picking the right team goes in. So for example, my buddy was really useful. He was really amazing. You could just always just ping him a message whenever, and we just hop on a video call, or I mean, not even just my buddy, just really any analyst would be happy to help out. I think generally like the same checklist for what constitutes a good intern is the same when you're online. So, but the way you go about things is a little bit different. So, the one thing you should be doing as an intern is you have to constantly communicate with whoever gives you work to make sure there's never any clashes, and making sure all your commitments are met and all the same deadlines. But obviously, it's a little bit different. So instead of just saying it to their face straight up, you're just having to ping them a message, but just making sure you are doing that, because it's so important to, especially when you're not in the office with them, to get your name out and just for them to just remember you're always there. That constant communication is always really helpful in that sense. And yeah, I mean, just generally really another thing, just being proactive. So again, making sure they always know you're there. So at the end of the day, and this is the same as when you're in the office, but at the end of the day, when you're all done, just checking with the analyst, being like, oh, do you have any work for me to do? Because you're basically there to make their lives easier, and that's the whole point. Making sure that you're indispensable, really, and making sure that they notice you when you're gone. And so just doing something like that is always really helpful. But again, like same applies in office as well.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything that you'd like to add, Sabrina? I know you don't start your role technically yet, but
I think virtually, like from what I've been told so far, like Tyrone mentioned, it's constant communication, and just making sure you've like good relationship with the team socially as well as just professionally, so they like know how your working style is. Because some people like working in the office, like for my team, for instance, half of them like working in the office, well, pre-lockdown, and half like working from home, and sort of knowing and trying to recognize how different people's communications methods are. So someone's quite curt and not being like taken aback by that. It might be because they're a bit more impatient or they like things done more quickly, and then there's other people who will take a longer time to explain things to you. If you can recognize it really early on, it'll make your life a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of, I know you've said you've not started your role, but what would your future role entail, like on a day-to-day basis? And maybe if you could detail what skills you think would be most important for students going into investment banking.
Yeah, sure. So from what I've been told of our mandates, there's a big range. So on like a day-to-day business or day-to-day like working life, I might have some client calls in the morning. As like an analyst and as well as an intern, you'll be helping with like researching company profiles and pitches. So different like potential acquisitions, for instance, or going through brokers' notes or financial statements of the companies and taking out key information. Likewise, you might be helping assist in the transaction process of a company, for instance, in helping out upload different documents to a virtual data room, which is a process as part of a bid process, a sale process for a company. They'll make sure all the potential bidders have all the access they have. That's normally an analyst role. In addition to just being like there to help the rest of your team with anything they might need. It can be really like trivial, but also a lot of PowerPoint, a lot of Excel, like helping with the modeling and the like. So make sure your computer skills are really good. In terms of skills, I would say analytical and numerical are really important because you're always looking at numbers. Having good communication, teamwork skills are really important because you're always working your team. You might work alone for a bit, but you'll always be part of a team working on a project. Attention to detail, like Tyrone mentioned earlier, ability to adapt to like multiple different challenges and multitask, and also like above all, like a genuine interest in the financial markets and curiosity within them. It will really help make you stand out.
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of like the advice that you have maybe for dealing with the steep learning curve, because obviously you detail that there's a lot that you've got to get to grips with. So what advice do you have for students with maybe adapting to that change and also dealing with long hours? I know you didn't really have too many long hours on your internships, but maybe going forward, what tips do you have if students have to deal with that?
Tyrone, do you want to say anything on that?
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So the one thing about like just the workload, really, you can just be really clever and just making sure you just draw upon like all your resources. So I had loads of support, so you obviously don't ask like the analyst everything, but what you always do is like you always try yourself like half an hour because usually you probably don't have as much as the analysts do. So yeah, just have a go at it, and then if you're ever stuck, like that's when you go into and ask for help for like an analyst, and that's always super helpful. And if not that, you can always even go to other interns. So like if the information can be shared, you can always just drop an email or drop a message to one of your fellow interns and just be like, oh, do you have any idea how to make a PIB, for example? And then they can just give you like a quick run through. That helped me so much. So I had like quite a tight group of like me and two other interns, and we'd always just ping each other messages if we ever needed help, like just very quickly. That's always something to keep in mind. Another thing as well would probably be to like make sure you know like what work you can like kind of pass on. So I know at Lazard there was a data team, and there was also like a design and presentation team. So if you got called by like, so like my VP might be like, oh, can you find out how many current accounts there are in the UK? And instead of just trawling through like loads and loads of things myself, because I obviously had other things to do as well, you could just ping that over as a request towards the data team, be like, oh hi, could you please help me find whatever you needed, and then they'll come back within an hour, and then you'd have that done for you, and it'll save you all that time. And likewise with presentations as well. So instead of you having to sort it all out, if it's like a super complex diagram, instead of you just working on it on like Photoshop or whatever, they'll just do that because they're the experts on it. And then as long as you don't need it in like the next half an hour, it's usually fine to pass on. And yeah, just in terms of long hours, especially for an internship anyway, you just have to remember that it's not that long. Like usually like it's 8-9 weeks with the team, and generally that's not too bad because again it's very unlikely that you would just be hammered the whole 9 weeks. I know at the start for me it was quite lax because that's just when they're getting to know you. They don't really know like what you can do yet, so they're having to like get used to that. So, and then it will only really pick up at the end. And by that time, there's only about 4 weeks left. So it's not too bad. And I mean, to be honest, it's quite a good thing, actually, if you find out that you don't really enjoy it, because then at least then you can rule out investment banking, say you don't enjoy long hours.
Yeah, I'd also add, in terms of like learning curve, make sure you like sit down with an analyst and your team assistant or team secretary and know the best practices. So know how the different drives work, know the keyboard shortcuts, know the easiest way around using different programs, know how your screen setup works, know how they do things quickly. But instead of you wasting the time finding it out, that can be really helpful. And in terms of long hours, like, if it's got to be expected, if like a project's coming up to deadline, if there's a board meeting on the Monday, you might have to work long hours. It's the industry, it's just how it is, because clients are paying a lot of money for your advice. But also, like, remember to sleep. Like, your performance suffers so much if you don't sleep, and your team don't want that, because it just makes your performance lousy. And also, I've found, like, all the time, like, I never really realized it was that late because the hours fly by when you're busy.
Like, what support came from the bank? So Rothschild and Lazard, do they have buddy systems in place, or kind of who can you go to, say, if you need support?
Yeah, so we had a number of things. So before the internship, we got given a buddy, an analysis of buddy, and then when you start the job, you have a buddy within your team. So already you have 2 analysts there, and then we also have a VP mentor. So it would be a VP just from outside of your team, and then they can just always feedback advice to you. And I think as well, there was an intern captain. So I think it was an associate in one of the teams, and he would always just be in charge of all the interns. And if you had any concerns, you could just flag it to him. If you had, say, you were like literally just any like minor queries, you could be like, oh, I'm not really getting on with this analyst, or I'm not getting along with this associate. Like, how do I go about it? So it was quite nice because you always had that just like loads of support whenever you needed it.
Yeah, and myself going forward, and during my internship, likewise, I have a buddy, so an analyst, and then a mentor who's our team lead or assistant director, so like the middle position, as well as like the wider support network of your interns, and like a champion, so they could be your senior advisor as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I guess it's kind of coming to a close. So I'm just going to ask 2 final questions, and then maybe if we have time for a few questions from the audience. But one of my questions is just, what is one best piece of advice that has followed you?
I would say, to be quick, from much personal experience, don't be afraid of failure. It's how you grow as an individual and employee, and embrace it. Always try. Like, doesn't matter, you're going to get rejected a lot if you try for a lot of different firms, and just accept it and go forward and learn from criticism.
So mine would probably be, so regarding interviews, just really actually like being yourself and just having something interesting about you, because you don't really want to start giving out answers which you think they're looking for, because I mean that's usually not the case. I know I've heard of some guy who ran a beekeeping society, and he just nailed all his interviews because it's just something like completely different, and then you get remembered, so everyone will remember you from then on. And so just having that little difference about you is always something really good.
Yeah, I'd add to that. Like, I've heard of MDs looking at like the looking at the last interests of people and talking about it. I had an entire interview once at Evercore on the women's a women in business society I helped run at university. So you can like steer conversations if you're interesting, or you have interesting thing to say.
If you can get involved in something at university, like a society, or get an exec position, that is great. It'll look so great on your CV, and you can kind of talk loads about it in your interviews, as Sabrina has said. So I guess kind of just coming to a close, what would be your final tips for students?
I think at like a younger stage, try and create a network and just meet as many different people as you can. If you're unsure of like what you want to do, just reach out to people, societies, like different social initiatives, go on LinkedIn, like send people messages, be really inquisitive, research online, so you actually have a firm understanding, because it will help you so much.
Yeah, I can back both of those things. So just I had to try out everything to just make sure, because I wanted to know, like, is Lazard, do I really want to go to Lazard? And I wanted to be like in my final year happy knowing that I was going to the right thing, and then I wouldn't have any regrets that way. So like so I could try asset management, for example, and be like, okay, I can rule out asset management from my list, for example. And there's so many like insight days, like presentation evenings, and they're also good to go to, just to make sure you can just, again, like just rule stuff out, making sure you know what you like and what you don't. And yeah, you know, just making sure as well that you have like a couple friends, or, you know, a couple people in your uni or whatever, so you can just help each other out, you know, interviews, assessment centers, because I mean, having to deal with it alone is pretty rough. Like I always needed the support of my friends, just powering through the interviews.
Yeah, and be passionate about what you want to do. Like if it's not what you want to do, then so be it. There's so much opportunity even within like one specific industry. So just make sure you know it, and you've done the time and experience to know that. Like for me, in the place I did my internship and for my graduate position, it was so obvious I'd found the right place, because I came out the interviews and I was like, oh my god, I really enjoyed those. Like I would definitely do that again, which is unheard of.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like I think just keep kind of reaching out to people, trying different things. And in terms of, I guess quickly, I was just going to ask, when you do reach out to people on LinkedIn, what would your advice be for kind of coming across well and hopefully getting a response?
Because I've had it happen to me and I've helped people get onto Sprint Weeks because of it, be really polite. And if you want to connect with someone, always send them a message along with the connection. Like, don't just send them a connect. Like I see people like every day and I'm like, I don't know you. Like, I'm not going to accept you to my network, because especially once you become a graduate, you get emails like every day from different like recruiters. You get like messages every day from people like wanting to connect. Just be polite and just like ask them, and be really accommodating to their time and needs, because if they are a full employee, they will be like very time pressured a lot of the time.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. I kind of will bring it to an end. So I'm just going to say thank you to both Sabrina and Tyrone. You've given some really great insights, and I know a lot of students will have definitely benefited from those. If you guys have any questions, I'm sure that they'll both be happy to kind of answer them over LinkedIn. And please do keep your eye out for our next professional development series event. It will be advertised on our social media pages in the coming days. So that will be on asset management and global markets. And yeah, thank you all for coming, and have a lovely evening.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.